February 1st, 2026, while WNBA players are preparing for what could be the most contentious labor negotiation in the league's history, potentially facing a lockout that threatens their entire season. Caitlin Clark will be sitting courtside at Madison Square Garden, but she won't be playing. She'll be analyzing LeBron James and the Lakers for NBC's primetime basketball coverage, getting paid, building her brand, completely insulated from whatever happens to the WNBA season. And if you think that's just a scheduling coincidence, you haven't been paying attention to how power actually works in professional sports. NBC didn't choose Caitlin Clark for a feel-good diversity segment. They chose her because she has something the WNBA desperately needs but can't seem to harness: leverage. The kind of leverage that lets you walk away from the table while everyone else is fighting over crumbs. And the timing of this announcement, dropping right as the collective bargaining agreement hangs in the balance, reveals something uncomfortable that many of you have been whispering about for months. The WNBA's biggest star has more power outside the league than she does inside it. Let's be very clear about what NBC is actually offering here. This is not a token appearance or a trial run tucked into some secondary broadcast. February 1st, Lakers versus Knicks, Madison Square Garden. That is the single highest profile regular season NBA game you could possibly construct. LeBron James and Anthony Davis against the surging Knicks in the building that defines basketball royalty. And NBC is putting a 22-year-old WNBA player who has never done professional television analysis at the center of their coverage. If you believe the real story matters more than the headlines, hit that like button right now. Because what we're about to break down changes everything you think you understand about power dynamics in women's basketball. Here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Look at who Caitlin Clark will be sitting alongside. Maria Taylor, one of the most respected sports broadcasters in the industry. Carmelo Anthony, a Hall of Fame scorer who defined an era. Vince Carter, arguably the greatest dunker in basketball history. Tracy McGrady, whose game was poetry in motion. Reggie Miller, one of the most clutch shooters who ever played. That's not NBC hedging their bets with a safe introduction. They're putting her on the same panel as legends and betting she belongs there. They're launching Basketball Night in America, their answer to Football Night in America, and they've decided a WNBA player still in her early 20s is essential to that launch. This is content insurance, and it's brilliant. If the WNBA season gets delayed or suspended due to CBA negotiations, NBC still has Caitlin Clark on their basketball programming talking about the NBA. If the season happens on schedule, they have the league's biggest star already embedded in their broadcast infrastructure, giving them massive leverage when negotiating for WNBA game coverage. And if she turns out to be a natural on camera, which seems likely given her comfort in pressure situations her entire career, they've just developed a media personality who can carry programming for the next 2 decades. But here's where this gets uncomfortable for the WNBA. The collective bargaining agreement expires in October 2025. Players are already talking publicly about sitting out the 2026 season if their demands aren't met. They want higher salaries, better travel conditions, expanded rosters, a bigger cut of revenue that their labor generates. These are completely reasonable demands from workers who've watched their league's value skyrocket while compensation stays stagnant. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. The players deserve better. Yet Caitlin Clark just demonstrated something that fundamentally changes the negotiating landscape. She has options that don't depend on the WNBA season happening. Think about what she's already secured. The Nike deal represents generational wealth, a signature shoe, an endorsement package that puts her in rarefied financial territory. She has USA basketball commitments in March for World Cup qualifiers, which means she stays visible and compensated through spring regardless of what happens with the league. And now she has this NBC arrangement carrying her through May 2026, with media income that most WNBA players couldn't imagine. If the Players Union decides to hold out for a better deal, if the 2026 season gets delayed or suspended entirely, Caitlin Clark isn't facing the same financial pressure most players would face. She can afford to wait. She can afford to let the negotiation drag on. She can afford to walk away from the table if the offer doesn't meet her standards, because her income streams don't depend on the WNBA's season starting on time. Now contrast that with every other player in the league. Most WNBA players depend on their salaries to survive. They play overseas during the off-season just to make ends meet. They don't have signature shoe deals or 8-figure endorsement packages. They don't have NBC calling them with alternative revenue streams. For them, a delayed season isn't just inconvenient. It's potentially devastating, and everyone at that negotiating table knows it. This is the weakness the title promised you. Not that Caitlin Clark is leaving the WNBA or abandoning her teammates, but that the league's economic model has created a situation where their most valuable asset, their biggest draw, their only true mainstream star, has more leverage outside the league than inside it. She can generate more media attention analyzing NBA games than most WNBA teams generate playing their actual games. She can command more interest from casual sports fans talking about LeBron James than the majority of her colleagues can playing in championship finals. NBC saw this clearly. They studied the data, and it's undeniable. When Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, the league transformed overnight. The Indiana Fever went from afterthought to must-see television in a single season. Attendance doubled in markets across the league. TV ratings hit records that executives had stopped believing were possible. Merchandise sales exploded beyond what the infrastructure could handle. One player rewrote the economic model of an entire professional sports league. NBC watched all of this happen. They saw Peacock's subscriptions spike when her college games went behind the paywall. They tracked social media engagement that dwarfed what most NBA players generate. They analyzed demographic data showing she reaches audiences traditional basketball coverage misses entirely. And they made a decision. Wherever Caitlin Clark goes, audiences follow. They wanted her going to their platform. Sam Flood, NBC's executive producer, called her one of the most captivating players and dynamic scorers in basketball. Not in women's basketball, in basketball. That phrasing is deliberate. It signals exactly how NBC plans to position her, not as a novelty or token presence, as someone who understands the game at the highest level and can communicate that understanding to viewers who want genuine insight. But connecting the dots reveals something the WNBA might not want to acknowledge. If Caitlin Clark can generate this much value for NBC analyzing games, she's not even playing in E. What does that say about the value proposition the WNBA is offering her? The league is offering her a salary that, while higher than most WNBA players, still represents a fraction of what she generates in attention and revenue. They're offering her a schedule that conflicts with her most lucrative endorsement opportunities. They're offering her a platform that reaches a fraction of the audience NBC can deliver. And they're doing all of this while asking her to be the face of a league that cannot figure out how to monetize the attention she creates. Drop a comment right now with your take. Do you think Caitlin Clark owes the WNBA her loyalty, even if the league can't match what she can earn elsewhere? Or is this just smart business from someone who understands her own value, because the conversation happening in the replies is exactly what league executives are terrified of? Here's what makes the NBC deal particularly strategic. The games they've scheduled for her aren't random. February 1st, Lakers versus Knicks. March 9th, Thunder versus Knicks. These are two of the most compelling matchups on the NBA calendar. Two opportunities to prove her star power translates beyond playing. Two tests that will determine whether this experiment becomes a long-term arrangement or a cautionary tale. And both games happen during the critical window when WNBA-CBA negotiations will be reaching their most intense phase. Think about the optics. While WNBA players are potentially preparing to strike, potentially facing financial uncertainty, potentially watching their season hang in the balance, the league's biggest star will be on national television every few weeks, getting paid, getting exposure, reminding everyone that she has options they don't have. That's not just good timing for Clark, that's leverage you can't buy. Now let's talk about what this means for everyone else in the league. If you're a WNBA player watching this unfold, you have to be asking yourself some difficult questions. If Caitlin Clark can secure this kind of deal while still playing, what does that mean for your negotiating position? If NBC is willing to pay her to talk about basketball, but the WNBA can barely afford to pay you to play basketball, what does that tell you about how the sports media ecosystem values your labor? The answer is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. The WNBA has a star power problem. They have one player who can command mainstream attention. One player who drives ratings and attendance and merchandise sales at a level that approaches what male athletes generate. One player who can get NBC to restructure their entire basketball programming strategy, and that player has just discovered she doesn't need the WNBA as much as the WNBA needs her. Some of you might be thinking this sounds harsh, that we're being unfair to the league or to Clark's teammates, but reading between the lines of this announcement reveals something league officials have been trying to avoid acknowledging. The economic model is broken. The WNBA has spent decades arguing that if they just had more exposure, more marketing, more investment, the audience would come. Then Caitlin Clark arrived and proved the opposite. The audience was always there. They just needed a reason to care. One player provided that reason, and suddenly the entire infrastructure of women's basketball couldn't handle the demand she created. That's not Clark's fault. That's not even necessarily the WNBA's fault, but it is reality. And reality has consequences. When one player generates that much disproportionate value, they accumulate disproportionate leverage. They get opportunities that their colleagues don't get. They get options that fundamentally change how they approach contract negotiations and career decisions. And everyone else has to figure out how to operate in an ecosystem where the rules have shifted. The Michael Jordan comparison keeps coming up, but it's incomplete. When NBC brought Jordan into their coverage, it was mostly symbolic. He was there to create buzz and lend credibility, not provide regular analysis for scheduled appearances. Caitlin Clark is being positioned entirely differently. She has specific games attached to her appearances. She's joining an established panel expected to deliver real insight, and she's doing this while still an active player, which gives her a perspective retired analysts simply cannot match. But there's a darker possibility we need to address. If the WNBA season does get delayed or suspended due to CBA negotiations, and Caitlin Clark is on television every week talking about NBA basketball, some fans are going to see that as betrayal. They're going to argue she should be using her platform to advocate for WNBA players, not building her personal brand on coverage of male athletes. That criticism might not be entirely fair, but it's definitely coming. And if the labor dispute drags on, if players start feeling financial pressure while watching her thrive on NBC, resentment could build within the league itself. The optics of the highest-paid WNBA player analyzing millionaire NBA stars, while her colleagues fight for basic improvements to their working conditions, aren't great. Multiple sources are whispering about tension that already exists around how much attention and resources get directed toward Clark versus everyone else. This NBC deal doesn't make that tension disappear. It amplifies it. There is also the risk that she becomes primarily known as an NBA analyst who happens to play in the WNBA, that her media career overshadows her playing career before she even hits her athletic prime, that the women's game loses its biggest star to broadcasting before she's accomplished everything she could accomplish on the court. NBC wouldn't mind that outcome. They'd love for her to become their signature basketball personality, regardless of where her playing career goes. But it would be a loss for the WNBA that the league might never recover from. When those broadcasts begin, we're not just watching a basketball player try her hand at analysis, we're watching the future of women's basketball economics play out in real time. We're watching a test case for whether WNBA stars can build mainstream media careers while still playing. We're watching NBC make a multi-year bet that the Caitlin Clark phenomenon is sustainable, expandable, and valuable enough to construct programming around how February 1st is more than a broadcast. It's a statement about where power actually resides in women's basketball. It's proof that the traditional model, where players depend entirely on their league for income and exposure, no longer applies to athletes who can command attention at the level Clark commands. And it's a warning to the WNBA that their most valuable asset has figured out she's more valuable than they can afford to acknowledge. If you want to stay ahead of the story, instead of just reacting to headlines, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Because when that CBA negotiation reaches its critical phase, when the real decisions get made about what the future of women's basketball looks like, you're going to want the analysis that connects the dots before everyone else catches up. Next video, we're breaking down exactly how much leverage Caitlin Clark actually has in those negotiations and why the numbers might shock you. This is how the game changes, not with dramatic announcements or policy shifts, with one player at a time discovering they don't have to accept the limitations everyone assumed were permanent. The question is what happens when everyone else figures that out too?